what separates a wantrepreneur and an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I love it, Rishi. Ooh, we're diving straight into it. I mean, hey, it's right there written on the label. Wantrepreneur versus entrepreneur. To me, it's really that very simple distinction, and only we individually get to decide when we've crossed that line. I really think about the millions, heck, probably billions, if we're honest, of people who want to be an entrepreneur, but for one reason or another, I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of those reasons here today, but for one reason or another, they don't actually take that jump. And really, when I talk about that jump, most specifically to directly answer your question about the difference between a wantrepreneur and an entrepreneur, it's, are you actually making money? That, for so many
Hmm.
businesses, that's the barometer, because we're going to talk about money today for sure, Rishi, I'm sure, because it's been one of the biggest life lessons for me throughout my 17 years of being an entrepreneur at this point. And money really is the determining factor of, are you going to be able to do this thing for that long? And so I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, they fall into the trap of consumption. They consume content on podcasts such as yours and such as mine. They read books, they watch YouTube videos, they work on some logos, they work on their website for a year or five, and they never actually launch anything into the world to actually help others. And so frequently, in life, we all are committed to helping others, but so much of that is measured through, is there an exchange of value? If you're giving value to others, well, then, just like in law and in contracts, you should be getting value in return as well. And I think that that's such a clear distinction. And I think really successful entrepreneurs understand that money, revenue, sales equal the ability not just to make impact today, but to set something up for long into the future. And I think that that's such a bedrock principle of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I asked this question because I truly feel like the the definition of entrepreneur is slowly, maybe quickly, diluting away. Because you go on Instagram nowadays, especially on social media, bio, boom, entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, and you look at their credentials. It's, to say the least, it's not a lot. And I feel like this entrepreneur is entrepreneurship is slowly fading away because everyone can call themselves an entrepreneur. And I ask you, why entrepreneur, right? Is being an entrepreneur, you said about money, is there a mentality shift actually associated with entrepreneurship that is distinguishable between entrepreneurship?
Yes, I love that question. And I'm so glad that you also threw a little bit of shade. I think it's essential shade to throw on how loosely we use the term entrepreneurship in today's society. Because you're right. Back in 2008, when I started my first business, Rishi, which, just like you, I was a college student at that time. And it was such a different choice. It was such a different path to be an entrepreneur. It had so much more meaning back in 2008 when I first started that. And today, you're right, everybody's an entrepreneur because the lines are kind of blurred. Because traditionally, what is entrepreneurship? It's just someone who does something for themselves within the world of business. And everybody's doing that. Heck, my mom, when she's on the pickleball court, she could record a TikTok video and publish it on TikTok. And because of TikTok's creator program, maybe she'll make 3 cents here or there. I hope that she doesn't. I don't think it's a good side hustle for my mom to do. But the point is that it's never been easier to start doing something. And that's where, to me, one of the differentiating mindset factors, I love how much emphasis you put on that, is really what I've noticed between wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, true entrepreneurs, not just the ones that label themselves as such. And we can definitely talk about labels as well and identity. But to me, one of the biggest things is waiting for permission. Seth Godin,
Mm.
for sure, is one of the most influential people in my life with regards to the books that he pumps out, his blog posts. He has a blog post every single day, and it always makes me think about my life and the world and my businesses and my work and my impact a little bit differently. He frequently talks about this concept of permission and waiting for permission. And to really add on to that, I'm just going to go deep down the Seth Godin rabbit hole here now because he talks about one of my favorite principles ever, which is the tyranny of being picked. And so frequently in life, from childhood through to university, even into the job market, we are at the mercy of the tyranny of being picked. Rishi, when you applied for colleges, you were at the mercy of which college was going to accept you into their program. You were asking for them to pick you. Those were the rules of the game that you had to adhere to. You've got an awesome summer internship lined up that you had to apply for and interview for, and they had to pick you. And I think that's one of the biggest distinctions between wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs is entrepreneurs just woke up one day and realized, I no longer need to live by the tyranny of being picked. I can pick me, and they don't wait for permission anymore. They give themselves that permission to say, I'm just going to go help people, and I'm going to put offers in front of people that I know help them move forward in whatever goals they have, whatever fears they're trying to overcome, whatever problems they're trying to alleviate, and they just go do the thing. And that's such a frequent thing. I always ask my guests at the end of every podcast interview that I do. I interview amazing entrepreneurs every single day of the week, and I always ask them, what's your best piece of advice? And I know how hard it is for them to avoid like the most simplistic piece of advice, because it is very powerful, and that is Nike's slogan, just do it. Ultimately, that's one of the important things. We water it down a lot, and there's a lot more complexities to just doing it, but I do think that's at the core of a lot of what we're talking about.
Thinking about this idea of waiting, I ponder about why people wait, and I think one of the reasons is also perfectionism, in the sense that people are waiting for this perfect idea. And you started a business from basically an idea that, tell me if I'm wrong, started off as something that you didn't mean to be a business. And I think people wake up, and when they say, I want to be an entrepreneur, they're waiting for this, boom, perfect idea that's just going to come into their lives. What is the actual step to being an entrepreneur, even before you get the perfect idea, or even how to find this perfect idea?
Yeah, I want to jump straight into the heart of the very first like knee-jerk thought that you just expressed with all of us who are tuning in today, because you went straight to, I want to understand why people wait for the perfect thing. And it's going to come back to permission. And I'll give you an example as to how trained we are from a mindset perspective to wait for the perfect business idea or the perfect time or the perfect skill set. Rishi, when we were kids, and we got a homework assignment. Okay, so our teachers told us, tonight you have to go home and memorize the periodic table of elements. Tomorrow you're going to get a test on it. And so we went home and we memorized the periodic table of elements. We took a test on it the next day. If you passed the test, we moved on. You move on in grades. You move on in your career. You move on with your test scores. You move on with all those things. Well, if you don't get a good enough score, then you retake the test a lot of times. And so in the real world, and so much of childhood is like that. If you sign up for youth sports, whether it's because of your age, you get moved through the age groups, or whether it's through your talent, you get put on a more advanced team. There's somebody else looking at your results and dictating when you progress to that next level. In the real world, and actually, I'm not even going to say in the real world. I'll come back to entrepreneurship in a second, because in your professional career, your boss dictates, Rishi, you have done the work correctly to move on to this next level with a promotion. It's always somebody else choosing for us, which comes back to that concept of the tyranny of being picked. Entrepreneurship is like a totally different playground. There's not a single other person on planet Earth who's going to give you that stamp of approval. And that's what makes it so exciting, but it's also what makes it so tempting to wait, because all of our lives, when we've done anything, whether it's any of these examples that I've given to you, test scores, job performance, college applications, anything, we've always gotten that stamp of approval from somebody else. But all of a sudden, when it comes to entrepreneurship, we look around and we're like, who's going to be the one to tell me that I'm ready to do this? And so that's why, quite frankly, Rishi, I think that people like you and I hope that we're a big part of that change, because I hope that one listener hears our conversation in any of our episodes. This is how I feel every time I'm behind a microphone. I hope one person hears it and they're like, that's it. That was all the permission that I needed. And because that then starts that train of saying there is no such thing as ready. So I'm going to totally push back. I don't believe that people are waiting for the perfect business idea, because I think two things, interesting thoughts here. One is that there is no perfect business idea, and actually every business idea is a perfect business idea, and we can talk about that in a little bit as well. But I think that they only arrive at the point of the perfect idea or the perfect state of readiness when they internally decide that. And it's something we've never been trained on before.
That's I love watching Shark Tank, and there was an episode where Barbara Corcoran said, I hope there's a study on this as well. She said her most successful investments are with entrepreneurs who've actually typically not done well in school. And it's funny because school, and I think the education system has a lot of work to do when it comes to fostering entrepreneurship, and especially college. So as a college student, it's tough to be able to even get near the grounds of an entrepreneurship, because all you're taught is, boom, an internship, get on the resume, another internship, get on the resume, and you work basically, and you keep working up the ladder until you're drained, until you're 60. Not to be super demeaning, but until you don't get time, until you regret the amount of time that you had to be an entrepreneur. In college people, what are we supposed to be doing to be able to develop an entrepreneurial mindset? Because if the college system isn't developing it, how can we develop ourselves?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, that would be like if you and I did a podcast episode about, how should we learn how to ride a bike? Can we major in how to ride a bike? No, we can't. Like, no college professor, even if it's the best professor on planet Earth, they cannot teach you and I how to ride a bike while we're sitting in a classroom or while we're reading a textbook. The only way to learn how to ride a bike, as simple as this example is to put our butt in that seat, fall over a bunch of times, figure out, oh, hey, that's what balance feels like. That's what I need to do. And I think that right there, we're really getting at the crux of what makes entrepreneurship so difficult to teach, is that the only way to teach it is by actually doing it. Now, what college has really excelled at for a century plus now is that they're really good at teaching you knowledge, traditional knowledge. And so college can teach you what a price to earnings ratio is and how to calculate it. It can teach you how to assess a company's quarterly filings from the SEC. You can learn these things. There's nothing that we have to actually, sit in the saddle and learn that way. But what I always found fascinating, and I think a large reason why I ended up starting my first business when I was in college, is that I always noticed a distinct difference between the way we teach business and the way we teach science. When we teach business, we have a tendency to teach things as facts. Sit in a business classroom, and this professor is going to speak facts from his experience, from the textbooks he's read, from the research that he's seen. He's going to preach these things to you. Whereas in a science class, as much as I skipped those classes because they happened to fall during Champions League time slots and I had other things to do back in those days, but anytime I would sit in science class, it was so fascinating to me because every science professor, rather than teaching you facts, they taught you a system of discovery. And at the core of that system of discovery is hypotheses. They invite you to have a hypothesis and then test that hypothesis. And I really struggled a lot as a college student with realizing these business professors are convinced that these things are fact. I'll give you a really tangible example. Is I would sit in a business classroom by day and a professor would tell me, oh, you have to study your competition because you have to outperform your competition. You have to really gain an edge over them. You have to have a unique selling proposition. All these sort of facts. And then by night, I would hypothesis test that. And I was like, is that true? Or is there a universe in which my competition actually become part of my unique selling proposition? And so a really tangible business takeaway from back then is when I started my soccer blog, which ultimately turned into my first business, I had no traffic up front. I literally had no traffic. If I approached a Nike or a Kit Bag or an Umbro or whoever it may be back then, and I said, "Hey, do you want to advertise on my football blog?" They would have laughed at me because I had no traffic. But what I ended up doing as part of this hypothesis testing was emailing every other football blog at that time and saying, let's pool our traffic together. Let's go to these bigger advertisers and try to advertise as a collective. And it worked. And these were part of my inflection points that I was hypothesis testing. College couldn't have taught me that. Really, I think college's place is to encourage you, go experiment, test all of these things. But again, then you'd kind of run into that age-old question of, what's the value here? You're just telling me to go learn for myself and try. But I mean, there's a lot of value there. I'm grateful to have 4 years of a playground experiment to just figure things out with no societal expectations, no 9-to-5 job, just free to actually do the things.
Yeah, so in your mind, college was still worth the whole experience of what you got out of it, despite the fact that your main entrepreneurial journey was separate to that almost?
I'd answer that. It's a question I hear a lot. Worth tends to go straight in the direction of ROI. And if you look at the price paid, especially here in the States, college is not cheap. So
outrageous.
yeah, was it valuable? 100%, because I did have that environment to really experiment and flourish in, which where else on planet Earth are we going to get that environment where our parents send us away and we just go live with a bunch of young dreamers like ourselves that are picturing a world of opportunities, and there's very little adult supervision, so we could just try things and experiment with things, and we have no real obligations otherwise. We walk into the cafeteria and we have unlimited food plans. Yeah, it's valuable 4 years from that perspective for me, but is it worth it? I'm not sure. I mean, if you can create that environment for yourself to learn, to experiment, to grow, I think that there's a lot of different ways to achieve that.
So then why is every idea the perfect business idea then?
Yeah, because here's the thing, and this is an argument that I'll take to the grave with myself, is the, any business idea. I always hear from people where they're just like, should I start this business or this business or this business? Quite frankly, I just tell them, Rishi, I'm like, start any business. Any single business is going to tangibly move you forward. Why? Because I don't actually care about your business idea. To your point where you asked, how are we going to develop that entrepreneurial mindset, that entrepreneurial DNA? Well, the only way you're going to do it is by becoming an entrepreneur. And so to do that, you have to start a business. Any business will do. I mean, I had some truly horrific business ideas and that I actually executed on as a teenager, if we go way back. And so those things taught me about selling. Those things taught me about marketing. Those things taught me how many things it's really difficult to scale. Those things taught me so many things. And I'm grateful that rather than waiting for some sort of business idea, or at least a half decent business idea, I just started literally anything from popping dents out of cars to a white label t-shirt shop. Like all of these experiences got me to become the entrepreneur that was ready to start what ultimately became my first six-figure business. And then from there, I've started other agencies, sold companies, and I've enjoyed a ton of entrepreneurial experiences, ups and downs up to this point. But it only happened because I started some terrible business ideas first. So how can you call those terrible? Because ultimately they actually turned into really great ideas that moved me forward.
When did your blog turn into a business then? Because if we look at any idea as almost starting a business, how do we then convert it into a business? Let's say like something like a football blog, which obviously won't make money on the first day compared to when you're selling shoes, because that business model is different. That one's completely looking at the idea of selling shoes. But a football blog, for example, you're not selling anything particularly. When did it actually become a business?
Yeah, so we've got to come back to money because what is a football blog when you're just publishing a football blog? Well, it's just a collection of me writing articles on the internet about
Yeah.
Manchester United. And that's all it is. What is that? It's entertainment. It was entertaining for me. It was entertaining for the four people who were reading my website back then. But it was 6 months in. So 6 months in, Rishi, I was writing articles just blindly, just purely out of passion and love for the game, as you very much can relate to. And a lot of it was just delusional. Like, why was I doing it for that long with no rewards? Again, coming back to the fact that in the real world, if I had bills, if I had responsibilities, I wouldn't have had that luxury to just 6 months grind and be like, I'm doing this because I like doing it. I don't care about any other success metric. But 6 months in, I got an email from a company out in Seattle, Washington. No idea how they found me. It was probably just through organic search via Google. And the guy said to me, he's like, I would love to advertise on your website. How much does it cost? I don't know how much it costs. I've never been in online advertising. I've never sold a sponsorship deal to anything in my life. So I picked a number that I was like, this is a number that would enable me to grow because then I could invest it in a new web development. At that time, I didn't even have a domain name because I didn't have any money. I was a college student. And so my website was like premtalk.blogspot.com. It was just built on a free like blogging
Yeah.
platform back then. And so in my head, I was like, man, if I could get this dude to pay me $200, I could get a domain, I could buy web hosting and have a self-hosted WordPress website. I could do all these things. So I very confidently puffed my chest out and I was like, it's $200. And the guy emailed me back and he's like, for how long? And I was like, oh my gosh, that was too much money. I shouldn't have said $200. And so I was like, for 6 months. So I sold my first sponsored spot for $200 for a whopping 6 months of advertising, which that dude got the best deal of his life because we
That was a
exponentially
deal
grew
and a
from
half.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I started growing from there. And so money really was that inflection point because you're also forced. Here's the other thing I'll interject about when you introduce money into the equation is now you have an obligation. Rishi, up until that, I had no obligation to anybody. If I stopped publishing articles every day on my blog, who was I letting down? Well, yeah, some people would be bummed out because they enjoyed reading my writing and my random thoughts about footy, but I didn't have any obligation. Now I have a paying client. Now I have somebody who I'm actually directly serving. I'm obligated to it. And I think that takes you to that next level. So for me, that's a direct inflection point. I went from just it being something that was fun and a hobby to it being a full-fledged business, all over $200.
You know what? I also think it's mad hard at the beginning as well, and I think this is why people get scared as well when they want to start a business, is because you're not going to make $10 on the first day. Tell me if I'm wrong. You're not going to. For you, it took 6 months on your first ever try, and not trying, obviously not downplaying at all. Someone reached out to you, and that enabled you to then be able to sell more. How can I start making money from the get go, or at least enable myself to make money from day one? In the sense that create habits and routines and practices so that eventually I'm making an actual business model. Because, for example, even with this podcast, it's not a money making model right now. And I'm wondering, how do I turn it into a money making model? So I'm sure there's a lot of people in general who are going, well, I don't want to start a business because I'm not going to make money now, and I don't know when I'm going to make money, and it's just going to be a waste of time. How do we get there?
Yeah, I actually think you can get there. And to be honest, I think you should set the hope and set the target as, I want this to be profitable from day one. And so I've obviously learned so much since the very first time that I ever did it. I'm not sure I'd give 6 months for $200 ever again in my life, but I would recommend, like, some teenagers probably should be doing that. But no, I think that if you're serious about being an entrepreneur and you already are at that level where you understand a lot of these concepts that we're talking about today, you should, from day one, you should ask yourself the big question of, who the heck does my work benefit? Like, who benefits from what I'm doing? Rishi, for you, who benefits from what you're doing? Well, I would imagine that your first thought is just to really hone in on your listeners. And that makes perfect sense because you're creating this content to be valuable for others. And so if you can figure out who is it that you're helping, well, then you directly go to them and you say, this is what I'm doing, and here's the value proposition, and here's how it helps you. Are you in? And you attach some sort of price to it. Now, podcasting and content creation is a little bit different from other traditional, like, service-based business models. So there's different ways you navigate those waters depending on what your business model looks like. But if you're a service-based business, for example, if I'm a teenager out there that is really good at AI prompting, and I think to myself, wow, I'm good at this, and I know this would be valuable to local restaurant shop owners. Well, restaurant shop owners have a very hectic life because there's always customers coming in. They face so many staffing issues. There's always changes. They probably would benefit so much if we took all of their customer data, all of their inventory data, all of their ordering data, all of their marketing data, and had amazing AI prompts or custom GPTs that would serve them. Well, at that point, you don't need to wait 6 months like I did. All you have to do is just stroll into some local restaurants, or even better, just scrape some data from the internet of restaurant owners' contact information and send them some emails. At that point, it's purely a volume game. You don't need 100% to say yes to you. You don't even need 1% to say yes to you. You could have 0.1% say yes to you, and you're making money from day one. All you need is somebody to see the value. So that's the answer there, is just show the value that you're doing, figure out who it's valuable to, get it in front of them, and ask for the sale, as scary as it is.
I know we said launch before you're ready. I do wonder, though, to provide value, there needs to be this process where we build skills. So do we build skills and then launch, even though I know we're saying launch before you're ready, or can we build those skills on the way?
I think you can build those skills along the way, for sure. And also remember, Rishi, I think it's really important. I always think about, have you ever seen that movie Catch Me If You Can?
Yeah, Leo, he smashed it.
Yeah, you're right. Leonardo DiCaprio. So that's based on a true story of Frank Abagnale. And so Frank Abagnale is one of the most famous con men in history. And don't worry, I'm not about to admire a con man, because there's a very happy ending to this story. But Frank Abagnale, and in Catch Me If You Can, they illustrate it very wisely. He realized, if I could figure out how checks work, it's actually so easy to con people and cash checks that don't belong to me and collect that money. And so in that process, again, so much of what we're talking about, and Rishi, I know in so many of your conversations, you frequently talk about loving the journey, loving that process instead of just the end destination. And I think that the real value there is that Frank Abagnale woke up one day and he's like, I just really learned how to gain expertise to a level where I can do something with it. And so my favorite Frank Abagnale story is that one summer, he conned his way into becoming a professor at BYU out in Utah. And he was just like, I'm going to teach photography at BYU for the summer. And I don't know if photography was the exact course, but I'm going to use that as the example. And so he signed on as a photography professor and faked his credentials there to the point where BYU said, yeah, take this summer course. And Frank Abagnale had never been a professor, didn't have a master's degree in education, didn't know how to teach others, he wasn't a master of photography himself. And that summer, when they polled BYU students and said who was the best professor this summer, he won by a landslide. And so, of course, it all came out that this professor faked his way into BYU's summer program. And the local news stations were asking him, how did you do that? Because you didn't do it on a level of just being a con man. You did it with exceptional standards and you delivered an incredible result. How did you do it? And his answer was so clear. He said, I just had to be one chapter ahead. And so, Rishi, I don't know how good you are at tennis, for example. I'm not the best tennis player in the world.
I am horrid.
That's great news, because then I can use you as the example. So I'm not horrid. I'm certainly not a professional or a semi-pro. I didn't play in university. But when I moved to Los Angeles, I hired a tennis coach. Like, I can beat your average player at this point in my life. So, Rishi, am I good enough to be a tennis coach? Well, to Roger Federer, absolutely not. To Rishi, am I good enough to be a tennis coach? I promise you, if you and I go on the tennis court, I can teach you something. I will in some way make your forehand marginally better. I will do something for you. And so when it comes to your question of, do I have to gain skills? What does it mean to gain skills? All you need to be is a little bit more skilled or a little bit more resourceful. I'll interject that as well, than the person that it is that you're serving. And so if I hire somebody to build me a new website, I don't need them to be the best web developer in the world. I simply need to trust that they're going to figure it out. If they've ever figured it out before, great, because they'll bring those experiences. But even if not, I mean, again, like, your value will just be dictated by the marketplace. If you're brand new to it, then yeah, you're not going to command $100,000 fees for your website. But I promise you, most people can go figure things out and take that pressure off of the people that they're serving.
Huh. So your value is actually dictated by your client, not how you compare yourselves to the other masters.
Not only that, but it's an interesting loop, because your value is dictated by your clients, but your clients are dictated by you. And so oftentimes I talk to entrepreneurs who they tell me very noble missions where they're just like, I used to have financial troubles, for example. Let's say that's the example that we'll roll with. Someone says, oh, I used to have financial examples. I want to teach good credit and good financial habits to people who are in that scenario. And I always ask them, well, okay, so what's true of every single person that you want to help? And they go, well, they're in really difficult financial situations. Well, now you've just dictated who your clientele is going to be. And guess what? That clientele doesn't have the money to pay you $1,000, $10,000, $30,000. So you indirectly have decided which segment of the market you're going to play in, what your value is going to be, by dictating what clientele you want to serve. So yeah, it's a very interesting problem. We definitely have input there, but we have to think about the other side of the table as well.
I was writing for my newsletter the other day after I spoke to Miss Sam Vanderwielen and Giovanni Vaccaro, both brilliant entrepreneurs, founded their own businesses. And there was an idea that popped up in both those podcasts, and I was reflecting on it, and it's this idea of purpose. And on the two podcasts, I was loving this idea that they said, you don't find your purpose, you find your purpose, you don't search for it, and the best businesses come out when the entrepreneurs are linked with a purpose. After reflecting on it, I'm going to give back a bit. I think sometimes when we hold on to this idea of purpose, we restrain ourselves, because that's when this idea of a perfect business idea comes back in. So, in your words, do you think that we could also just start making money without even thinking about our purpose?
Yeah, I love the fact that you intuitively are pushing back there. I'll tell you. So once upon a time, when I was like 20, I went to an entrepreneurial conference. It was the first time I had ever intentionally signed up for an entrepreneurial event, just to see what this entrepreneurship was all about, since I had fallen into it. And the speaker was talking similar to those lines. He was just like, you need to follow your passion. That's advice that we hear a lot. And I grew up in New England. New England is absolutely beautiful, particularly in the fall. We've got rivers, we've got lakes, we've got so much beautiful outdoor space. And at that time in my life, I loved kayaking. I was kayaking every single day. And I remember sitting there and I was like, kayaking's my passion. What business could I start within kayaking? Well, I don't want to sell kayaks. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to design kayaks. I don't really want to sell accessories. It's like, what? Should I be a kayaking tour guide? I was like, no, I don't want to do any of these things. I love kayaking, but I don't think I want to do it for my business. And so I really struggled with that advice from so many people. And I just interviewed somebody on my podcast the other day. Shout out to Chris Randall. He's up in Michigan, and he's a former account manager at PepsiCo. And this dude was crushing in his corporate career. And he has such a good attitude. I loved interviewing Chris. And he one day woke up and he's like, I don't want to do this for the next 8 years. Like, he was getting promotion after promotion. He's just like, I don't even want to do it for another year. Like, I want to do something on my own. And so he was in a cab thinking about, what do I not like doing? What do most people not like doing? And he came up with, totally random, he came up with laundry. He's like, most people don't like doing their laundry, and most people don't like cleaning. And so he's like, I'm just going to start a cleaning app where people can just hop on there, enter what rooms they need clean, their living room, their bedroom, and I'm going to have a cleaner at their doorstep with predetermined pricing, no quotes, no sales friction, none of that. And Chris had never worked in the cleaning industry before. He had never cleaned somebody else's apartment or house. That's not what he did for a living. He was a very successful account manager at Pepsi. And so as I was interviewing Chris, I was just sitting there on the other side of the microphone, and I was like, Chris loves the cleaning industry now. Like, this dude has a whole landscape of what the cleaning industry looks like. He knows everything about the marketplace. He has all these expansion plans. And I realized he loves this stuff because he did it and because he's good at it. And I think that so frequently it's really warped advice that we have of like, follow the things that you're good at, those passions. But it's like, I'll actually become passionate about mostly anything, to be honest, when I'm good at it. I really struggle to see people who are really good at something and not passionate about it. So just do things, and when you get good at them, you'll start to become passionate about it.
I love that because I read this. I don't use LinkedIn much, but I saw this post from Alex Hormozy on LinkedIn, and he was discrediting passions the same way you were. He goes, people don't have real passions until they try something they truly suck at. And people develop passions when they become good at something they used to suck at. So the best advice I've ever received from my father is simple as 5 words, hopefully. You don't know what you don't know. And that's why I think trying things is incredibly important, which is why I think the college environment actually promotes this in the sense that we have so much time, and we tend to not waste it, but tend to put it back into recreational activities. What is the first activity you would try, in the sense that what realm would you enter if you had to restart?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm super excited by AI. Every time I use AI, I'm just like, dang, this is fun, and I see possibilities everywhere. And I think that those are probably, if I had to pick like just 2 things off the cuff right now that I think the criteria that we need to follow. One is it just purely needs to be fun. Going all the way back to my soccer blog, remember I threw out that rhetorical question earlier in our conversation of why the heck was I doing that for 6 months? The only answer is because it's fun. Like, there's literally no other answer. There's no other good reason that I was doing it at the time. So I think it has to be something that it's fun. And then secondly, I think that there has to be some sort of opportunity. If I, as much fun as it is to watch grass grow, I love being outside. Is there possibilities there? Is there anything I can turn that into? No, not necessarily. It's a dead end. Great hobby if you're into it, but you have to sort of see some opportunity. And so if I had to start over, I think AI is so exciting. I think we're at that really interesting cusp. If there's one thing that I'm like slightly bitter about generationally, it's that I'm a millennial, so I'm in my mid-30s now, and I see, and I've had the chance to interview so many .com multimillionaires, or even better, billionaires. I see these people that the reason why they made it, and they're the first to tell you, is we were at that cutting edge. We were there when it was happening, and we just happened to be on the right pitch at the right time. And my generation missed that. Your generation missed that, of course. I also just slightly missed the iPhone coming to invention. I missed app development. I missed all of those things. We missed so many of those things. Rishi, your generation is yet to be at that cutting edge of something. Mine is probably the cutting edge of social media, my generation. And so that ship has very much sailed. There's still opportunities there, but it's not this explosive thing like the .com era was. And so Rishi, now all of our generations uniquely, here we are all together at this very interesting intersection in time, and it's AI is going to drive so much of that. We're all figuring it out. Every single generation, I think there's so much untapped potential there, and I think there's a million or more different use cases and different opportunities there.
And here's the thing. If someone like me, I suck at using AI, well, guess what? I can still suck at it and give value to someone who sucks at it more than me. And a separate idea as well, on this idea that we both have podcasts, what do you think of content creation? Because everyone tells me, or I mean, I can see it with my own eyes, content creation has never been easier. All you need to do nowadays is pick up a phone, record a 5-second video a day, and over time you grow a following. Is that a viable business model?
Yeah, so my answer directly to your question of what do I think about content creation? It needs a business model, a sustainable business model. Because you're right, it's never been easier, which means more people are doing it. And gosh, there's so many ways we could take this direction. The first thing I'll share with you, before I really dive into the crux of what you asked, the first thing I'll share is that historically, a very easy way to succeed, as far as easy being very relative, of course, a very easy way to succeed would be to do things that are hard for others. So in 2008, there were very few soccer blogs on the internet. Why? Because in 2008, it sucked to try to start a blog. It was like really hard. WordPress wasn't what it is today. There weren't really clear website builders. And so I was just willing to trudge through the pain of building it. And so I was, if you Googled, English Premier League blog, we were ranking very high on Google. And that's how we grew to 3.5 million readers every single month just from organic traffic because I was one of a few doing it. Now, today, if I started a soccer blog exactly the way I did in 2008, it's not going to work. The times have changed. There's much lower barrier to entry. And so content creation, there's no barrier to entry anymore. Absolutely none, which means billions of people are creating content every single day. And so I experienced this myself. I started my podcast in 2016. It was very easy. Rishi, my launch week, I think we hit like number 68 or something on the top charts. Now, I don't know about your podcast. I haven't done my homework on your metrics just yet, but I'm willing to bet you didn't debut at number 68 in the
Not
top
even
charts.
close.
Yeah, and it's because everybody and their uncle has a podcast these days. So can anyone do it? Yes. Has it become harder to stand out and to succeed? Yes. The ones who are going to be there, I'm very proud to have a top 1.5% show on planet Earth. We're top 200 in most of the top charts in over 150 countries. The reason is because I have honed in and identified a business model that allows us to flourish. To be totally honest, and full transparency here in our conversation, the first 500 episodes, or the first 400-ish episodes of my podcast, it was top of funnel for me. So my podcast was a great mechanism for me to get attention, get followers, get people who said, yeah, I kind of like something about the way this guy shares his information and his knowledge. That then led them onto my email list and my online courses and my retreats, all of these things. But after doing that for so many years and 400 plus episodes, I was getting burned out. It was no longer sustainable. And so I was all lined up to quit. I invited one of my best friends in the world, Ian Westerman. He's a 7-figure entrepreneur and YouTuber with 100 plus million views. And him and I would always talk about getting burned out from content creation because we were like, what's on the other side of content creation? And so I invited him to come on the show. He didn't even know the role that he was playing, but he was queued up for episode 499. And really what I wanted to explore with him in that episode was, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. Content creation is a very difficult beast, and I'm not sure what the rewards are. And so when we finished recording that, he said to me, dude, are you really done? Like, for real? And I said, yeah, episode 500. I already know the title of it. It's called The End. That was the whole title. And that week, I got an email from somebody that I had previously interviewed, a lawyer based out of South Carolina. And it was his executive assistant emailing me. And she said, Brian, so-and-so had such a great time coming on your show. Fun fact, we actually made over $20,000 from him coming on your show, from people reaching out and saying, can you help me start my LLC? And so Rishi, I sat there and I was like, wait, what? I'm over here like putting so much work in to create all this content so many times a week. And I'm doing it just for love of the game. And this guy made over $20,000 from one 30-minute appearance on my show. And I was like, I have the power. I've built this audience up. I have the power to put a spotlight on amazing businesses, amazing entrepreneurs, ones that I vet, ones that I get to reach out to. And I was like, let me flip content creation on its head and say, I'd love for you guys to contribute to making the show possible because you're going to keep me going. You're going to keep my my team's ability to go because now I have a team and I pay them so that we can have a 7-day-a-week podcast. And so I found this different model that really helps us to flourish and to succeed. Everybody's getting value here. And importantly, coming back to your question, it is a sustainable one. I'm not going to stop anytime soon because it's only amplified the ability or our ability to impact even more people and to grow even further. Our guests are winning because now we have an even bigger audience because we've been able to invest in our growth so much. And our listeners are winning because we are really up leveling the guests that we invite on the show. I just had the former CMO of GoPro on my show last week. He was unbelievable. Like the entire time I was sitting there, I have a whiteboard in front of me every time I record, just frantically scribbling things down because this dude was dropping so much knowledge because he just believes in a rising tide lifts all boats. He came on our show and said, yeah, I want to share this goodness with the world and help other entrepreneurs succeed as well. And so, yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but it shows how strongly I feel about the fact that if you're doing content creation, you need to have something that will keep you going and something that will facilitate further growth. You will get burned out if you simply just create content for content's sake. And the world doesn't just need more content the way that everybody else is doing it. The world needs content in a way that's facilitating and fueling growth in so many other ways.
Let me give you a little thought to think about. So I was watching Iman Gadzhi's, Simon Squibb does these like master classes with other serial entrepreneurs, and Iman Gadzhi was on it, and they did this entire 45-minute episode on content creation. And Iman Gadzhi basically was saying, if you are starting a business, or if you're not, even if the business has nothing to do with content, do content creation anyway. And his logic was, you develop a personal brand. Do you agree with that advice? Should everyone, no matter what, do content creation? Because like we said, the barriers to entry is non-existent. If anything, we're actually promoted to start content. I think it might be the only field where the barriers to entry it's actually harder for the barriers to, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but we're just promoted everywhere we go. Should everyone actually start content?
Yeah, so it's fun. To me, these are two very different questions that you just asked. Because the first question is content creation a business model? And that's where that answer is all about if you give it a business model and if you develop a business model. Now, this is a different question. And the reason why I feel like it's such a different question is because the rules of engagement are drastically different in creating content for creating content's sake versus a business model's sake. And so do I see value in the rules of engagement for creating content for content's sake? Yes, and here's why. One, you're just going to get better at it. Like, it's inevitable. When I recorded episode 0 of my show, Rishi, it was terrible. Like, go back and listen to my episode 0. It's atrocious. I sound so bored. At the time, I thought it was really good, but now in hindsight, 1,200 plus episodes in, I realize how terrible episode 0 was. But the only reason why I hit publish on that episode was because I openly acknowledged to myself, this was very much an internal thing that I worked through, and I said, whatever the first thing that I do is, it's always going to be the worst. So I might as well just get it out of the way. And so creating content for creating content's sake really teaches you the habit of hitting publish. And I think that we all become better, more impactful human beings when we are constantly hitting publish. It's no use to say you're going to do something good for somebody else and then talk yourself out of it and chicken yourself out of it and be like, Brian would never want to hear me. Like, hear from me. My conversation with him was 2 years ago and I don't want to bother him. He's probably doing different things these days. No, hit publish, do it. There's literally no consequence to putting something out there, especially something that's good into the world. And so I think that creating content really flexes that publish muscle that we all need in life. Secondly, it's so beneficial to just hear the way you articulate things and be on the spot to express yourself, because we all have thoughts all day long, but it's so hard to get behind a microphone or in front of a camera and actually succinctly express those thoughts to others. Even if there's nobody else on the other side, it's just really important to always be hitting record and mastering that craft. Rishi, it's so interesting to me. I'm sure you've seen these stats as well, as how many people, their number one fear in life is public speaking.
Public speaking,
You and I were not born as public speakers. Now we both do it by choice, and we do it to give value into the world. And I know for a fact, just from our off-air conversation, you and I both love it now. And the only reason why we love it is because we've been practicing it. We've been doing it, going back to that bike analogy. And so, yeah, and we know it's a valuable skill. Your life will only improve by being able, by being better at expressing yourself, at articulating thoughts, at public speaking, at standing up and owning your voice. Every time I hear a new podcaster, I always ask like, "Hey, how's it going? What do you like? What do you think of the world of podcasting?" I hear the exact same thing every single time. Can you guess what it is, Rishi?
I actually have no clue, but go on.
Every single new podcaster says to me, "Yeah, it's fun, but I hate the sound of my own voice." It's like,
Oh,
no,
that's so true. That is so true.
nobody likes the sound of their own voice, but you just get acclimated to it. If there's one thing that humans are really good at, it's that we just accept circumstances around us pretty well compared to, a lot of different things. And so if you hate the sound of your own voice, the only way to overcome that is to keep recording and keep hearing your own voice and keep putting it into the world. So yes, for content's sake, for personal development's sake, but again, if you want to tie it in with your business, you better have the rules of engagement and some systems set up to actually make that a worthwhile endeavor.
I love the idea that we're always going to be at our worst at the present because you can only get better. And I highly suggest everyone do this. I do this all the time. I do a update almost on my camera roll every month to say where I am, how I'm feeling, how my setup is, just because I'm excited to know that in 2 years' time, when I look back, I can laugh about how shit my setup was or how shit my stats were, whatever it is, because I know that I can't be worse. There's no harm in trying because guess what? The downfall is baseline. You can't go below baseline. So that's why I love doing update videos because I know that in 2 years' time, regardless of how much I've improved, I know I've improved.
100%. And to me, that's the beauty of it is if you never hit publish on anything, well, you're staying at, I love that analogy that you used as the baseline. You're going to stay at that baseline for so much longer. The only way up is to just freaking do the thing. When I moved to Los Angeles, I became obsessed with the Venice Beach skate park. And so it's, the world famous. Everyone's seen it in pictures and in movies. And if you just stand there, I've never been on a skateboard in my life. But if you do stand there, you see all these incredible skateboarders. And then you also see some very beginner ones who are just daring enough to enter the pit with all the other skateboarders. And it's crazy because it makes you realize that the only way these dudes get better is by falling. They are just willing to fall. And so me, in 36 years of life, how much better have I gotten at skateboarding? I haven't, because I'm not willing to get on it and I'm not willing to fall. And so to me, that's like one of the beautiful things of business and personal development in life is I'm just constantly way more willing than the people around me to be like, I'm going to suck at this. Like, I'm just going to try it and I'm going to get better. Like, that's going to be the worst that I ever am. And that's it, whether it's chess, which is another one of my recent hobbies, or photography or public speaking or anything. Might as well get the bad stuff out of the way so that I can start the track to improvement.
By the way, chess is an addicting phase. We've all been there. It is an addicting hobby. I love doing a bit of chess.
It's the best. And for me, it's because of the life and business lessons that I take away from it. Because Rishi, this is such a fun concept to explore. Have you ever heard about the concept? Seth Godin calls it the dip. Have you ever read that book or heard him talk about it?
I've seen, it was brought up in one of my classes, but go on.
Okay, so for listeners' sake, so Seth Godin talks about the dip, and he says that every single thing in life has a dip. And so as he correctly points out, Rishi, this is a crazy stat. You and I were once as good at football as Cristiano Ronaldo. Unbelievable. He was born with the exact same amount of skills that you and I were born with, which is none of us three could walk at that time. And so we started walking and then we started playing football. And that's a fact. He used to be as bad as we were. And so just like him, though, you and I grew up kicking a ball and we got a little bit better, especially once we learned how to walk. And then you turn 5 years old and you learn how to pass and you learn all of these things. But the difference between Cristiano Ronaldo and you and I is that, well, actually, what we have in similar is that we all reached a point where it got harder. Is we got to a certain degree of competency, and then it started to get hard. I can teach anyone how to kick a ball. I can teach anyone how to dribble a ball. Just don't use your toes. Like, that's lesson 1 when you learn how to kick a soccer ball. And so Cristiano Ronaldo went through that same learning experience. But then you get to a point where you're just like, I'm not generating enough pace, or I'm not generating enough spin, or I'm not orienting it correctly, or I'm not seeing the game the right way. Cristiano Ronaldo hit that same wall that we did. That's the dip. But he was willing to go through the dip. we stopped. The dip stopped us. And so when Seth Godin talks about this concept, he straight up says, he's like, ask yourself in advance, am I willing to get through the dip? Because any endeavor you have is going to reach the dip, and it's going to get hard, where you have to work 10 times harder for marginally better results. It's always easiest at the beginning. Like I said, if I brought you on the tennis court, I could make you pretty significantly better than you started out after an hour. And so, but you'll reach a point where to get better on your serve, you've got to put 100 hours in. And that's the dip. And only a few people are willing to get past that. And so when I think about all of these concepts, chess, you reach one of the dips. And I went deep and I was like, do I want to quit or do I want to learn more? And I started studying what grandmasters said about the dip. And one of the concepts that popped up, Rishi, that I'm so obsessed with is the concept, the principle in chess of simplification. And so when anybody starts playing chess, the very first thing that they do, watch any beginners start playing chess, and they'll just trade pieces. Oh, your pawn's there, my pawn's right there. I can take it. Okay, I'll take it. You take it back. We're just trading pieces. What are we actually doing? And we don't know. And I reached the point in my chess progression where I asked the question. I actually hired a chess coach, this 20-year-old kid from Belgium that would bully me every Thursday morning as he taught me how to get better at chess. And we would sit there and I would say, like, should I trade this piece? Yes or no? And he's like, well, what benefit do you get from trading that piece? Or are you in an advantageous position? And I didn't know. And so I started looking into chess grandmasters and literature and thinking that's out there. And I found simplification, which simplification states that get into a winning position. Do everything in your power to get into a winning position. And then as soon as you are in a winning position, even if you're only one pawn up, simplify. And simplify means trade everything. Take as many pieces off the board as possible. And that is so beautiful because what a lot of grandmaster literature says out there is they say the more pieces that are involved, the more pieces that are in the table, you are at greater jeopardy of losing your winning position. And so they say, get into the winning position and simplify. And Rishi, even that very simple concept followed into my life, followed into my businesses, followed into my relationships of if I'm in a winning position, let's not complicate life. Let's remove all the other pieces that could introduce some complications and just focus on the winning position that matters. So yeah, even going deep into these random asides and tangents, these things, if you're intentional about learning and getting better, they should trickle through to every single aspect of your life and business.
And this idea of the dip is really important because I think if you're starting a business and you actually set up the prerequisite in this journey that there will be a dip, that at least allows you to be resilient when the dip comes. Because so many of us, I think, are scared of starting a business because we're like, what if there's a dip? If we tell ourselves there is going to be a dip, that at least tells us that, and we at least tell ourselves that, hey, once I get past the dip, that's a story I will tell. That at least reinforces the idea that we will be okay after the dip.
Yeah, I love that concept of this is going to be part of my story. It's something that all of my teams internally, we always joke about that. We're like, oh gosh, people have no idea what we deal with behind the scenes. One day we're going to share this story on stages. Even more than that though, Rishi, I think, again, just because I've always been super competitive because I grew up playing sports. And so I like dig into a level that I've so rarely seen out there that when I hit those dips, not only am I looking forward to it being part of my story one day, but I actually tell myself, I'm like, this is it. This is what makes most other people quit. This is the moment. I finally found why most people never succeed in this thing. I'm going to be one of the ones that goes through the dip. And so I felt that dip with my podcast, felt it around episode 100. Something happens around episode 100 is you're just like, I've done this 100 times. Is it worth it? Like, am I giving value? Are people actually tuning in? Do I enjoy this? Do I want to keep doing it? Am I consistent enough? Can I find more consistency? It's hard when you reach episode 100. And so I recognized it. And I dug in and I was like, it is hard. Like, I probably should quit. And most people other would quit. And so then I went through it again in episode 250, 500, 1,000. And like, here we are over 1,200 episodes in. And I've just kept going more than most other people will. So I think there's so much value. Coming back to the point of value, there's no skill in being the one that just keeps on going. But that brings value in the marketplace as well. So bringing value to somebody or something isn't merely about having skills or being the smartest person in the room. There's so many other ways to bring value. And one of those could just be perseverance. I recognized it when I was in my early 20s running a marketing agency. was not the best marketer in the world, but I told my clients, I was like, 100%, we are going to keep pushing until we find that winning formula, until we find that winning campaign. And there's a lot of value in that as well.
Not to burst people's bubble about the dip, I'm going to ask a bit of a negative question here, so I hope you bear with me. When we're being self-reflective about our own business, about our own podcast, about our own blog, and we hit a dip and we're asking ourselves, is this worth going? Is there a moment where we give an answer and that actually means that we should stop?
It's a good question. As an intuitive person, I would say that there's no one real logical way to answer that, because I could show you so many examples throughout history. Like Colonel Sanders, the guy who started KFC. I'm not sure if you've ever read his story. Over 1,000 restaurants said no to him with his fried chicken recipe. Over 1,000 restaurants. And this dude kept on going. And I think famously it's like restaurant number 1068. And it's like, man, if he gave up after 1,060 restaurants, KFC would have never been started. And it's an impossible question to answer because of that very reason. Is, when my podcast, my blog, my soccer blog, I'm so adamant I should have stopped after 6 months. And like, thank goodness for that $200 of showing me even that small glimmer of hope. And then fast forward, I was like interviewing Wayne Rooney and Jose Mourinho and like all the biggest names in the world. And that happened just because I persisted. And so I think it's a deeply personal and deeply intuitive question that we have to answer. With that said, Rishi, I've had things in my life where I have quit and I did come to that point and I was like, no, that's it. I'm done. Like there was a night in 2013 that I just threw my hands up in the air. Is when my business partner was like, I don't think we should do our agency anymore. We were so burned out from client-based work. And that night, the only thing I cared to Google was GMAT testing centers. Because I was like, that's it. It's just, I'm going to get my MBA because that's what employers have decided is important. I'm going to start applying for jobs. That's it. I'm not meant to be an entrepreneur. I was convinced of it. But I woke up the next day with some sort of crazy level of excitement and conviction that I was like, no, this could be, to your point, the beginning of a really great story. But that only came from inside. I don't think two people on a podcast, and I don't think anybody else in the world can ever answer that question. It's such a deeply intuitive, personal question that only comes if we carve out that space and time for us to look inwards.
And you know what? I will say, I downplayed it earlier, but I do think these type of moments is where purpose is really important. If you can at least identify or align some sort of purpose with what you're doing. And I know I've downplayed it earlier saying we don't need purpose, but when times get tough, if we can at least look at ourselves and say, does this have purpose behind this? Does this grow corn? That's when real perseverance comes in.
Yeah, and I think it's not just purpose. Probably the reason why you and I have a little bit of a negative reaction towards it is maybe that's not the exact right word. Like where my head goes is I'm like, well, it's not just purpose because yeah, you could have that purpose, but do you have conviction? Like,
Exactly.
would you actually
step
up to the line? Like, that's why, I mean, you and I grew up watching the most beautiful sport in the world. Like, there's a reason why soccer is the most popular sport on planet Earth in any country, regardless of language barrier or anything. And it's because once that first whistle, once kickoff happens, you're either going to rise to it or you're going to wither away. And I think that it's those moments that it's just a personal test of how much do I want this? How much conviction do I have in what I can do here? You and I both know it's the beautiful thing about sports. The best team doesn't always win. The team with the most purpose doesn't always win. The team who can win that title doesn't always win. It's the team oftentimes that have that conviction as well. So that's definitely part of it. But yeah, there's probably one word that incorporates all this stuff. We can talk to AI about it after.
We'll find it. Yeah, we'll ask ChatGPT. I always hear from other entrepreneurs that the start is actually always the hardest. That if you can get through the start, that's when real magic tends to happen. And the start is where a lot of people tend to drop out. Do you tend to agree?
I used to. If you asked me that probably 5 years ago, I would have said 100%. Yeah, the start is the hardest, but no, now, absolutely not.
Really?
I'm not going to buy that at all. Dude, it's so easy to start. Anyone can start anything today. The start is the easiest because there's no expectations. When you start something, everybody celebrates you. Everybody's like, good for you, Rishi. This is awesome. You can do this. Your energy is always highest at the start. So I would argue it's the easiest there. I think it gets hard when you face rejection. I think it gets even harder when you have some momentum and everything crashes down. And I think it's those moments that are way harder. You also have a level of expectation at that point. When you're starting, you're just running on dreams and excitement. There's no data points that support what you're doing. There's no real problems to solve because nothing really exists. So yeah, I'm totally going to push back on that. I don't buy that at all.
And you know what? Maybe I should have actually asked this at the very beginning, but can everyone be an entrepreneur? Is the entrepreneurial livelihood? Maybe it's a different question, two different questions, but can everyone be an entrepreneur, and is the entrepreneurial lifestyle for everyone?
Yeah, it's a good question. I get asked it so frequently and my answer constantly changes, but I think where I settle now is, can everyone? Yes. Can. I mean, can is such a big question that, like, I will never dampen the possibilities for any single person on planet Earth. Can anybody do it? Yes. Will everybody do it? No, because holy cow, it's freaking hard. And there are so many easier paths. Again, easy is relative. I don't think anything in life is actually genuinely easy. But can anybody rise to it? If they're willing to dig in, if they're willing to just swallow the frog day in and day out and deal with all the punches that get thrown your way. If they can do those things, then yeah, they can be an entrepreneur. Is it for everybody? No, for those reasons. I wouldn't wish it on most people. It's my like gut reaction there is I know how difficult it is. I hope for everybody who I care about that they don't have to deal with the things that I've had to deal with over 17 years as an entrepreneur. It's really rewarding. I'm glad that I have. It's made me a way better person, a way more successful, resilient, all of those other adjectives that we so value. But it's so hard. And that's why I imagine parenting is very difficult because you want the best for your kid, but then you also want them to experience all these hard things because it makes you a better person. But it's like, how do you wish for someone to have all the benefits without any of the costs? So of course, it's a fantasy world. So can anybody do it? Yes. Will everybody do it? No. And do I wish it on others? Maybe not, but for the select few who have that within them, like, oh, we need more of those people to actually just go in and take those punches and keep building extraordinary things.
I'm so happy you brought up parents, because we were talking about this idea about society earlier, much earlier in the episode, about how society isn't fostering the entrepreneurial mindset. And I think parents are also very scared about their kids just running off to become entrepreneurs, because we can't really blame them. Like, let's not get mad. It is a risky endeavor. In college, I feel like it's not as risky compared to when you leave college, because that's when your job is on the line. You need to provide food on the plate. How do you even start a business while making it as non-risk or being risk averse? Is that even possible, starting a business and being risk averse?
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't think we can have this conversation. I love that you isolated right in on parents, because I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about a concept that was so hard for me to learn firsthand. And that is, I now call it, I called it in my book when I published it in 2015, well-wishing haters. Because Rishi, there were so many times in my entrepreneurial career where it felt like the people who cared the most about me were haters. And I really had to do a lot of self-exploration and talk to people far wiser than me to make sense of it and to start to understand it and get over it so I could continue on the growth journey that I was meant to be on. And it's for all of these reasons. Like, parents are scared, and understandably so, if and when we choose the path of entrepreneurship. You don't get benefits. Like, if you aren't selling, you don't get paid. You and I, Rishi, we could accept a 9-to-5 job, be terrible for a few weeks. We'll continue getting paid. In fact, we could probably do it for a few years. We could probably get away with it. And so, in fact, in some industries, in some companies, we could probably be terrible for a few decades and continue getting paid.
This is where it spirals.
Yeah. And so that's the thing about having a 9-to-5. And that's why people make it seem like it's the safer choice. Plus, you get benefits and all these great things that happen. A lot of bad things too. Like, you have to ask other adults for you to take vacation or see significant family events. I'll just throw a little bit of shade there. But so of course it makes sense that parents are afraid of it. And so I remember when I graduated college, that was kind of that one defining moment where my parents were like, it's time to get a real job. Like, you're going to need benefits. You're going to need a 401k. You're going to need a steady paycheck. You're going to need all of these things. That felt like a dagger to the heart for me. I was like, you guys don't believe that I could make it with my own business? Like, even with all the things I've built during college, you think I need an employer to give me that sort of security? It felt so harsh to me, and it felt like they didn't believe in me. And so it wasn't until I met an incredible entrepreneur. His name's Jonathan Fields, New York Times bestselling author, amazing podcaster. And Jonathan shared with me, he's like, you need to internally, like, you need to know how to work through these things internally. And he goes, next time your parents say that to you, like, hug them or reach out to them and say, look, I hear you. You're scared for me because you love me. And I don't need that fear right now, to be honest. I am going to go because I have the conviction. I have the belief in what I'm doing. I'm going to figure it out one way or another. And so, yeah, that to me, that's one of the hardest parts about being an entrepreneur is you have to go through, everybody else is going to throw their stuff on you. They're going to throw their fears on you. They're going to throw their opinions on you. And it comes back to conviction. Purpose is going to help you in that, but you also have to have conviction in your purpose, even to go counter to the very people that you care the most about. And Rishi, going this deep into it and this passionate about it, I forget your original question, but I just know that there's so many different things that come up here.
Well, it's basically the idea that parents don't want us to be too risky. So is there even a realm where we can be risk averse and start a business?
I would say, to me, risk averse isn't even a thing. Like, what's risk averse in life? Nothing's risk averse. And we saw in 2020 how many people got laid off. Even as much as you and I are kind of throwing a little bit of shade on the 9 to 5 world, even that's not risk averse these days. It's super risky. I think it's crazy. One person could walk into your office or your cubicle tomorrow and say, that's it, you're done. And from what I hear all these horror stories that it takes like 6 months to find a job these days. That's crazy. Whereas nobody can walk into my office tomorrow and fire me. And so is there a way to do it risk averse? I think there's ways to hedge your bets more wisely. And a lot of that is focusing on getting sales and revenue up front, like we talked about earlier in our conversation. You can hedge your bets more wisely. I love pre-selling things. I think that, look at what Tesla does. Look at what Elon Musk does. I don't care how you feel about Elon Musk, but when he announced we're going to create this totally out there truck, the cyber truck, and it's going to be like nothing else out there, that was a big risk for Tesla to do. And so how did he hedge that risk? Is he said, place your pre-orders. They got millions of pre-orders, raised $1 billion+ in revenue before the thing was ever made. So you can hedge your bets, but I don't think you can do it in any risk-averse way.
That's a really great point. There seems to be this idea that just because a 9 to 5 isn't an entrepreneurial journey, it's completely risk-averse. But reality, it's you got to pick your risks.
Yeah, 100%.
And then, do we think a 9 to 5 and entrepreneurship is mutually exclusive?
It doesn't have to be. I think that's the cool thing about today's world, especially with AI. I mean, I've got a few AI employees these days that are working for me. And in my head, I'm thinking, gosh, actually, okay, I read a really interesting stat the other day about, I'm now fascinated by this metric, about how many employees it takes to generate $1 million in revenue. And, pre-internet, that number was super high because you needed a bunch of people to use their hands and actually make things in factories. There was so much that you needed. And then in the 90s, that number came down. And I think right now that number stands around like it takes 5 people to build a business that is doing $1 million in revenue. It's not a big number. And I actually think, just me personally seeing behind the scenes, like my pre-production assistant, her name is Michaela. She's not real. She's AI. But when guests sign on to come onto our show and they fill out their questionnaires, Michaela monitors those questionnaires. She has an entire knowledge base of all of our inner workings, and she reaches out to them and answers any of the questions that they submitted on their questionnaires. I don't need to hire anyone for that role now, and her emails are exceptional, and people love her. She's got a little email signature of her own and everything. And so I think to myself, I could be working a 9 to 5 now and still be pumping out as much work that I am doing because technology enables that. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. In fact, Rishi, I'll even add to that a little bit. I think in some cases, having a 9 to 5 when you start your job is immensely beneficial because now it buys you time. So much of today, a lot of it we've kind of weaved in and out of talking about money. Money buys you time. If you and I had $10 million in our bank account, it's really easy to spend the next 3 years building something absolutely epic. Because time is on our side. Money is buying us that time. Why do people raise money? Why do people go on Shark Tank? Because they want someone to say, yeah, I'll invest 500K in your business. Well, 100K of that is their salary for the next year. Literally, the shark is paying for their salary for the next year so that they can spend another 12 months working on the thing. And so, yeah, if you've got a 9 to 5 and it's enabling you to have that freedom and experience that time that it takes to build things, it's going to get you through that hard part, the hard beginning that we did kind of talk about a little bit. It'll take you through that hard part so that you do have the time, freedom, and space to actually start something.
That's great advice. Like, I didn't even actually think about that. A 9 to 5 can actually promote entrepreneurship. Brian, mate, I didn't even realize, but time flies when you're having fun. And I do this with all my guests, but we spoke earlier, and you said that this episode has to be a banger. And because it is, I'm going to change up my question slightly because this is a special episode. I usually ask my guests what's the best advice they've ever received. But I want to make it a bit more specific in your case because I think you resonate a lot with me and I feel like you can resonate a lot with college individuals who want to start a business. What advice would you give to your college self?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. Because anytime we ask people what's the best piece of advice that they can give, I know this because I do it at the end of every episode too. You really suffer from recency bias and whatever came up in the conversation, all of those things, they're just going to pull whatever comes top of mind. But if I could go back to my college self, I guess there's a few things that I would tell them, but really what comes up the most is one, like question everything. Don't believe the rules of engagement that anybody else has ever said. And so much of this comes back to science class of just hypothesis tests. Cool. If somebody tells you that this is the way it is, try it. I always heard, oh, your resume, you're going to have a summer internship. Rishi, you and I didn't even talk about it off air. One summer, I got this really prestigious finance internship in Boston. And at this really competitive company, they claim they only hired Ivy League graduates or Ivy League students. And I didn't attend an Ivy League school. And I was like, I'm just going to impress them in the interview. And I got this internship. And they told me that. And it was 2 weeks into the internship that everybody told me I needed to have on my resume to get a job after graduation. And 2 weeks in, I got an email from the glorious Manchester United saying I had been approved for a press pass for their preseason tour of the United States.
You're joking.
And so, because that was right after I had started my soccer blog. And so I texted one of my best friends from high school and I said, Chris, what are you doing this summer? Let's just go follow United around. Like, let's do something epic. And my boss was on vacation that week for that internship. And so I looked up the org chart and his boss was the CFO of this, 20,000 employee company. So I strolled into the CFO's office and I was like, hey, I work for Gary. I'm an intern. You don't know who I am, but I think I'm going to quit. And he was like, okay, good. And he's like, when? And I was like, I think I'm like, is it okay if I quit today? And he's like, well, you're supposed to give 2 weeks notice. And I was like, I have to be in Houston tomorrow. And he's like, go, just do it. And the rest is history. Like, everything changed just because of that. And so, yeah, I guess that story reveals so much advice that I would share with my college self, which is like, question everything. Just freaking do things. I promise you, like, there's no long-term repercussions for anything. Everything can be fixed or figured out afterwards. Be safe. But just go do things. Take those risks. You've got nothing to lose. And most importantly, just have conviction in the things that you do. Believe that it will work. If you go into it saying, oh, I know this probably isn't going to work, but I'm going to try it. No, go into it and say, I think this is going to work. If it doesn't work, that's okay. But I really do think this is going to work. And I think that advice or some combination of all of these things, I think it would do my college self a lot of good. And Rishi, for you and so many others, I hope that even an ounce of it has some sort of impact on your journey.
Brian, that's amazing advice. Brian, you've been an absolute pleasure. I want to say that you always have an invite. Again, I would love to do another episode with you. So thank you so much, Brian. Words don't even, give value to what today meant. So I appreciate that a lot.
Yes, thank you, Rishi. I know how much work you're doing behind the scenes, maybe even more work than you need to be doing right now, but huge kudos to you for just putting this stuff into the world, man. So appreciative of you.
Brian, it means the world. Thank you so much.